Welcome to Wire Guild. This tutorial is for a butterfly bangle or bracelet, and it can be changed really the way it looks by the simple means of just using different beads. As you can see, each one that I've made here and photographed for you looks quite different. The materials you're going to use, you need 7 lengths of wire. Each one is 21 gauge, and 2 of those are going to need to be substantially longer than the others. Approximately 6-7 inches of 20 gauge or 0.8mm round wire, some 18 gauge half round wire for binding, 4.5 inch of 1mm or 18 gauge round wire to make a clasp. The beads, I used 4mm Swarovski bicones, and I used 2 approximately 1 inch long coils made with the coiling gizmo or coiling-a-jig. If you're not sure how to make those, I do have a skill set tutorial in with the free ones so that you can see. Now I have my 7 wires here, 2 of which are longer. The reason for that is the bottom of the butterfly is going to use more wire than the top because it drops down further. So for instance, I want this bracelet to fit somebody who's got, say, a 7-inch wrist, so I've cut 5 of my wires to 7.5 inch, and I've cut 2 of them to about 8 inches. Now the reason I've done that is because I'm going to show you what to do when you get to the end of your piece and your wires are too short. Find your central point and make a mark. Really, those 2 extra wires could do with being at least 3 or 4 inches longer than the 5 normal wires. So I picked up my round 20 gauge wire, and I'm going to put a bend in the middle, and I'm going to start and bind the centre of my 7 wires. Now normally I would use a half round binding wire to bind a bracelet in the middle, but this wire is not just there for binding. This wire is actually there so that it can create part of our butterfly. It's not as easy to bind with round wire as it is to half round, and because of that you really need to take your time and just gently ease it, especially with the first one, into place. Now I've got a bit of play there, so I'm just going to pull that so that it's tight on one side and then tighten up the other end and then press that down. So just a little bit more care is needed. This is going to make the body of our butterfly the central area, and it is a place that does draw the eye, so if you kind of made a mess of it, it will be noticeable. So nice and slowly make sure you wrap round. So I did one side, now I'm flipping over to the other side because I bent it in the middle ish, not totally. And I'm going to put 4-5 wraps around, pressing down each time. Make sure that it's firm on the wires, and make sure that your wires are nice and flat and straight. Now let's just make its little antennae smooth. I've got a kink in that one. Now you can either use your fingers like that or nylon jawed pliers if you have some, and just tighten those together and press them down. If you didn't want to use a round wire, what you could do is you could use a half round and just bind it in the middle like I've done with this one. The binding's just the same as we would do at the ends, however you're not going to get any little antennae bits to go on the top, but it's entirely up to you. It just makes your butterfly look different. Now I've wrapped this around, but unfortunately my 2 longer wires are at the top end, so really my antenna ought to be on the other side because the longer wires are the bottom of the butterfly. So I've just wrapped that one up and round again, and I'm going to take that one back. So I'm just going to straighten that back piece out where it was bent around, even that out. So my antennae are now at what will be the top of the butterfly, or its head, and my 2 long wires are the bottom 2 of the 7 wires, because they're going to create the bottom of our butterfly. Now think about how deep you want this to be. If you've got a piece of wire and you're going to make this drop down, say an inch, a full inch on both sides, you're going to need an extra 4 inches of wire overall on your length. So take that into consideration when you're doing your butterfly. I'm just going to grab a couple of beads. I like these butterflies done with 4mm beads, but there aren't that many 4mm beads out there that will slide onto 21 gauge square wire. Unless you're using a metal bead, they usually have larger holes. But the Swarovski ones do, they tend to have that bit bigger. So I could place my beads that high, and if I was going that high, or I could go that low, it would show me how much more wire I want. So work out roughly where you want it prior to cutting your wire. Now I'm just, oh sorry, hang on a minute, let me get that back into shot. All I'm doing is I'm gripping these wires together so that I can put my pliers over the top, so that when, I think my camera's a little bit closer today than it usually is, I haven't quite got enough room. So I've got my pliers holding both wires, and then I bend one way and bend one the other. That means that the two bends are at the same height. Often if I try and measure down and bend one and then go back and bend the other, I never get them exactly the same, so I always try and put the pliers across. So pop my beads back on. These are just various green Swarovski beads I've got. Let's just push that on as far as it will go. Holding the bead, sorry, the other one's escaping. Bend the wire up at the side of it, and then put your pliers over the top and very gently. Don't do this hard, it's only crystal. If you press that too hard, too violently, your bead will go ping and break. So let's bend that. It doesn't want to bend round. Come here. Go up there and bend. Occasionally with dead soft wire you'll come across a piece of wire that's not quite as soft as the rest of it, and you will find that it doesn't do quite what you want. But if you take your time, don't get frustrated with it, just keep putting it where you want it to be. Let's just ease that in with the pliers. There we go, it's gone. It was just that little bit coming out where the bead was, it did not want to bend. Anyway, it's bent now. So I now have two little like leggy bits coming down, and I'm just curving this wire away, trying to replicate that curve you get, you know, on the bottom of the wing. And let's do the same on the other side. Nice gentle curve. There we go. They're not absolute mirror image of one another, but it really doesn't matter. We are trying to replicate a butterfly, which is an organic natural thing. It's reasonably symmetrical. So I've taken my next two wires, my next two longer wires, and I've brought them down, and I'm just going to find another bead. Come here and just pop that on, and the same, whoops, let's get that one in first. Now I'm going to fit this in the gap that I've just created there. So if that bead that we put in first were toes, this would be like the knee. And I'm just bending the wire in a soft, come here, curve. Don't worry about the other 5, just worry about the 2 that we're working with. There we go, like that. Make sure that they're flat to one another. You don't want these wires twisting, because the more they twist, the more likely it is that the wires will try and cross themselves. It just makes it awkward to bind later on. So that's quite nice. Let's put the one on the other side on. There we go. Doesn't want to go on. Go on. There. try and get it the same, but like I say, if it's not totally and utterly symmetrical, it doesn't matter. But there we go, in you are. And then smooth that wire, and again, I use pliers so much because pliers are a little unyielding. So if I put my pliers over the top of two wires, one cannot sit on top of the other because there isn't sufficient room. If I do it with my finger and thumb, it can push into the flesh. So if I use my pliers, it's more likely that the wires aren't going to cross. Now going right to the other end, so the top wire, and I'm just pulling that out because that is where my coil is going to go. Now I think these coils are a little long, especially for 4mm. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're too long. Let's just give it a curve and have a look. So I'm just holding it down to where it would fasten. It all depends on the size of the bracelet you're doing. If you're doing a really tiny bracelet, you're going to need to cut some of this off. Now I could cut off 3 or 4 of these coils and then do the same to the other, but I'm going to leave it for now. I'll wait until I've got all the beads on and then I'll have a look. There's no point in cutting anything until you're absolutely sure you need it cutting. So let's just start now with the other wires that are inside. So you know your top wire is going to have the coil on. Your bottom 2 wires have already got beads on. So you're left with 4 other wires. When you put the bead on, start on the topish, well, it's not a top wire, it's the second one, but you know what I mean, and put that bead in first. I don't like that colour. Let's try that one. Now if you put the top one in first, it's the way they sort of then line up, and then the next one. And the great thing about bicone beads is they sort of sit and lock against one another, whereas with a round bead they don't do that. But these, they sort of sit neat. So let's have a look. If those wires were, these are bigger beads. These are 6mm lapis. You could see much difference. These are 5mm pearls, and again the way they sit is different, but I always put that one, this little one at the end there as well, but I put that first bead on that second wire so that it creates this line going out. These are much smaller. If you're going to make a smaller bracelet, say you're making a bracelet for somebody who only has maybe a 5.5-inch wrist, you can't start using huge beads because this butterfly is going to go so wide. I'm just bringing everything together because I want to have a look. I can't really tell with the wires splayed everywhere. I've got one wire that's plain. I've only put 3 beads on, and I'm going to use that wire as like the demarcation line, if you like, between, if it was a real butterfly, it'd have the bottom wings and then the top pair of wings, and you usually get just a solid line between the two, so I'm not going to put a bead on that. I'm just going to use it as that, and I've just eased it into a little curve so that it follows the line of the bottom ones a little bit. This really is quite tiny with just 1 row of beads, and I think because of the depth that I made the bottom, it's a little bit unbalanced. Let's have a look at the coil. You see it's huge there, is that? It's making it really wide, and those beads just look a little bit lost. So we'll slide that off again, and I'm going to put another row of beads on because it's not looking particularly impressive with just 1 lot of beads. If it was going to be teeny tiny it would be alright, but it's not. So let's get some more beads and slide those on, starting again with the one nearest the top, not the one that's going to have the coil on, but the second wire down, and push that second bead all the way in, and then I'm just straightening the wires. It's just so that the bead will actually slide on, but very gently. And the next one in, and where's that last one? Do I need one at the bottom? Yeah, let's stick one on. Is that a different colour? See, if I'd have left them in the box, they'd have been fine because I have all my colours separated, but I took them out and put them on the table to work, and I think I've got them muddled up. There we go. Doing the other side will be so much quicker. It always is when you've made your mind up. It's just this process, the way you're playing and you're thinking, do I want that, don't I want that? Now let's gather these together. That wire is crossing over the bottom wire, so we'll stop it from doing that. Bring them together. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's pretty. That was all flat and neat. I think the second row is quite nice. It would probably look really, really pretty if I'd got more contrast in the beads. If I hadn't used such similar colours, you could do them quite bright there. That would look lovely. Pop those nearer. Now then, this oversized coil, let's have a look. No. Okay, let's get rid of some. I'm going to cut off 4 coils, so I just cut straight through after 4. Now that's not wasted because I can use that on an ear wire or something, or I can use it as a little spacer bead. Now I'm just cutting straight in to finish that end off so it's not sharp, because when you're cutting sideways it can be a little bit like a needle end that you've been left with. So once you've cut sideways, go back in and cut so that it's an absolute flat flush cut. It's not a sharp pointy beat. Okay, let's see, we've got a shorter coil now. How's that look? Yeah, that's a lot better. Push that curve up. Okie dokie, I like that. You have to take into consideration as well that it's going to be curved. Now I'm going to add a bead into the end. Another advantage to the bicones when you're using a coil is that when you slide a bead onto the end, the little pointed bit of the bicone goes into the coil, which holds the coil in one place. It sort of finishes it off quite nicely. But they sort of slot into one another. That wire's crossing again. It's one of those days, isn't it? I hate my wires to cross. So I'm going to bring these together, go in there, and I'm going to get some 18 gauge half round wire and put a bend on it. Make sure that the flat side, not the domed side, is going inwards, so that's going against the metal. And then wrap it around. Don't worry if that first wrap is not that tight, we can always go back and tighten it up. Now I'm flattening the rest of the band down, taking another wrap around and flattening the binding down. Now that first wrap now is really quite loose. Sorry, I'm wriggling about a bit. There we go. And get that one tight. Yeah, I think it's because I've got the camera a little bit closer than normal. I've got less room to manoeuvre. Take that one around the back. So I'm going to put 4 wraps. I can just get another one in. I've just got enough room to get in there, in between that bead, and that should hold that nice and still because we don't want that sliding. Cut off the excess wire at the back and press down. If you cut off less than half the distance across the back, the binding that you put on has less chance of lifting. Smooth that out and trim the other side and press that down. Lovely. And that's the first half of our butterfly. So let's do the other half. Now this should go much quicker because we know exactly what we're doing this time. I'm going to take each of the wires and splay it so that I can get in with the beads. The bottom wire, the one that's nearest to the tail of the butterfly, I'm just going to bend down slightly and curve it so it becomes our barrier line between the bottom wings and our top wings. Then we're going to add the beads, the same colour beads as I did on the first side. Now where have I put them? Those. Yeah, was it them? Yeah. And the paler ones. Right. So, second wire down from the top, not the top one because that's getting the coil, but the next one goes the first bead, and the second bead goes on the next wire, and the third bead goes on the next wire. This way they'll all lie in a lovely sort of horizontal diagonal line, and press all of those down and in. Do the next colour if you're putting 2 on. Like I say, you may be using much larger beads, in which case you'd only need 1 of each. Down we go. Do play with your beads with this. Experiment and see what you can do and what will happen. I have made one of these. Those of you that look on Facebook will notice that I have made one of these with little faceted stones in settings. Each one of those was wired on individually. Doing it with the beads is actually easier because you can slide them on. So I'm going to bring all my wires together, making sure nothing's overlapping by using the pliers as like a slide to slide them into. Bring them down tight. There we go. Now then, let's have a look at that coil on the top. Yeah. You can start measuring distances. You know, I'm at the same amount of distance from one end to the other. But I tend to do everything by eye. Now let's get that bead straight down and into the end of that coil. Give it a bend. You have to ease the bend round, the coil around into a bend. Sorry, you have to ease the bend into a coil. Otherwise it'll just give you a straight line, which is no good because you want it to look like a butterfly. And they tend to have arched top wings. There we go. I mean, we're not doing an absolute perfect rendition. A friend of mine does the most amazing chasing and repoussé butterflies. They've been exhibited all over the world, and his are wonderful. They really do look like proper representations. They're almost the real thing in silver, but we're not doing that. Straighten those. Never be afraid to pause in your work. Never be afraid to put it down and come back later. Let's bend this round. There's no reason you can't do any of the things you attempt. because there's just more bends in a complicated one than there is in a simple one. That's the only difference, there's just more of them. Now let's flatten that down. And trim off the other end. Flatten it down. So we've created our butterfly, and if you wanted this as a pendant, you could have done this much shorter and turned the ends into just loops and added a chain in, and it would make a lovely pendant rather than a bracelet. Now if you want fancy, you could put beads on the antennae. Am I saying that right? Antennae. Feelers, diddly bits. But you know what? Nah, gilded and the lily. We'll take those off. So I'm just going to put a bend in and support it with my left hand and then bring it down and over. Supporting again with my left hand and taking it down. And then I'm going to wrap it around the coil. Don't be too worried about wrapping it around the coil. If you want, you can get this super straight and you can actually tuck it into the coil so that you can't see the ends. I quite like to see the ends because it gives me the effect that it's actually wrapped itself around a different part. So I've just wrapped around and I'm just pressing that end down and in, so it's sort of underneath, it's not anywhere where it would touch. And then I'm going to do the same on the other one, round in, try and get it rough at the same size, and wrap that just around once. Trim off so that that's going to tuck underside of that coil there. Lovely, press down. Okie dokie. We have a butterfly. Now then, let's move all these bits and pieces out of the way and have a look. Now do you remember at the beginning when I said if you're going to need much longer lengths, and I left mine a bit short? I did that on purpose. So there is my short wire from the end because I put such a deep dip on the bottom of the butterfly that if I was to make that into a bracelet, I would end up with a bracelet that was probably about 4 inches, 4.5 inches. But there are no mistakes. Never are mistakes in wire wrapping. Just take the wire and curve it round. So if you have mismeasured, or you have done the bottom of the wing deeper than you thought, don't worry about it, because you can change it into something else. So I've just wrapped that wire up and around on both sides so that it reflects both, and then just wrap it on the inside of that line of binding and take it around, press it down with my pliers and bring it back to the front where I'll trim it off quite short. Press it down, it will tuck underneath itself. When I say there are no mistakes or only new designs, it is totally true. It's so forgiving, is wire wrapping. It allows you to do so many things, and sometimes you'll make a mistake and you'll think, oh dear, how can I put that right? And you'll put it right and end up with something that totally outstrips what it would have looked like if you'd done it so-called the right way. It's the confidence to say, you know what, it may not look like the tutorial, but I think it's better. So this one's got little curls on the edge because one wire was too short, but I used both ends. So I'm centering up. I've put my bracelet on my ruler and I'm getting my centre point because I wanted it to fit a 7-inch wrist, so my wires need to be 7-inch. So I've put it on at 3.5 inches and I've measured my wire. Put my pliers over the top and I'm just going to press down, and can you see that mark that it's left? and then I can do one wire at a time, hopefully without shooting animals, children, or just generally all around the room, which usually I must admit I do. So that's okay at that end. Let's just get the other end. When we put the clasp on, the clasp will give us probably about an extra ½ inch over and above the length of the wires we've got, which is usually enough room for it to have some movement on the wrist. There we go. If I was going to make this bracelet with a lot of expensive gemstones and then it was going off for sale, I would make it quite large. I would probably make it 8½ inches. And the reason for that, I'm just using the binding wire now to put the bindings on the ends. I'm going to leave a gap at the end of about 1/4 inch. The reason I would make it larger if it was a very expensive one is you don't want to reduce your market at all of who you're going to sell this to. Obviously, if you're making it for a gift or a present, or it's for yourself or a friend, you know exactly what size you're making. If you're making these in advance to sell, you need to give yourself the opportunity to sell to as many people as possible. Now, if you make it a bit big and somebody comes along with a small wrist and says, "Oh, I love that, I want that," you've taken your tools with you. You send the lady off for coffee and you cut it down. You just have some more binding wire, you take the clasp off, cut it back, make it shorter. So that's one end. Let's do the other end. So I'm holding them together, I'm holding flat, I'm using my ½ round binding wire, putting a bend in so that the flat side is on the inside and the domed is on the outside. Make sure the wires are straight and flat, no crossing. Hold between thumb and finger and just put the binding around. Press down. Don't worry if the first one's loose, you can always go back and retighten it up. Press down, just easing those up slightly. I think I probably started a little bit too low. So when I get the same amount of wraps on that are on the other end, let me just check the number there, it's 5 of those, I need another wrap before I'm in the right spot. So I've got 6 wraps on this end that I've just done, but only 5, just press that bit down, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, 6 there, and definitely 5 there. So the easiest way to do is just unravel where I started. It means you're wasting a little bit of silver, but it goes in the scrap pot and it goes back to whichever company you're buying from anyway. Press that down, 2, 3, 5, make sure that's straight, there we go. Now you need 2 pieces of 1mm or 18 gauge round wire. I'm going to make a clasp. Again, if you want a better look at this, there is a skill set tutorial just on making a clasp. I've got the 2-inch piece held between round nose pliers and I just make it into a U shape. So I've got one piece that's 2 inch, one piece that's 2.5, and the 2-inch piece is just getting bent into a U. A little bit close, open that out a bit. Now I'm going to grip right on the very tip. If you don't grip on the tip you will curl it, and we want this to be a nice round, there we go, nice and round all the way around. Make sure it touches, and the same on the other side. If you want to put a different sort of catch on your bracelet, that's absolutely fine. I like the hook and eye, it's nice and easy to do, it looks good, it works. So this is my 2.5-inch piece, and I'm going to hold it in the middle. It's easier if you mark it, if you're not used to doing it. Put a bend in, bring it together, and then over the top and close it up nice and tight. so that you've got one piece of metal that's folded over. Then I'm going to turn that into a hook. Then I'm going to get my flat, where do I put them? Flat pliers, there we are. Flat nose pliers, and grip the hook part in the pliers. You can just see the tips coming out there. And I'm going to bend one wire one way and one wire the other. Again, this is an easier way than measuring. It means that the bends in the wire are perfectly symmetrical. Round nose pliers onto the very tip of the wire and curl that up and underneath. Same on the other side. And what you've done is you've created a little hook and eye clasp. Works very well with the bracelet because you've got a certain amount of pressure on the bracelet holding it closed. Now we need to make some hooks, so I'm going to go, I've only got 6 wires now. If I had 7 I'd do 4 on one side and 3 on the other. Oops! But I've only got 6, so I'm going to do 3 on either side. There we go. If I had 8 I'd have 4 on either side. And I'm going to bend those wires up to the top of the piece of jewellery. Now I'm going to grip this with my round nose pliers right on the very tip, and I'm going to turn the this piece of wire into like a little tiny hook. You see that? And the same on the other side. I always go away with the first one and then towards myself with the second. I don't know why. So I've made 2 little hooks. Don't close them. If you close them so they touch, we can't get our hook or eye, or whichever one you're putting on, you can't get it in place. So clip those little hooks over and into those loops. Pass the pliers through the hole, so snipe or chain nose, through the hole of the hook or the eye, and then ease, come here, ease that circle over. Those 3 wires, ease them over so that they hold the hook in place. Now I've got a few photos to show you this close up, but hang on a minute, let's just get this one done. It doesn't help that the time of day the light's changing in here and it's starting to, it's not ideal. Not used to sunshine, it's usually raining. Right, let's just press that down now. So by curving these in, you are ensuring that there is nothing sharp or pointed that's actually going to touch the wrist, and obviously you don't want. So those are the hooks in close up. Don't know if you can see them better there. This is a different bracelet, but don't worry, the idea is the same. So you've hooked on your loop, you put your pliers through and over the edge, and then just ease them down to make that wire touch on the loop. So my bracelet's got its hook and eye on, and I need to shape it up. As you know, don't really bother with mandrels. I've got, what have I got here? I've got a little jar that's got some beads in. It's probably a little bit smaller than I'd normally use, so I'll put the edges around first. So those are the bits that would go around, and then I'm not quite pushing. Can you see how I'm sort of pushing and releasing? Now if I go in there, that's a little bit smaller, I can just get those a bit tighter. Now then, if I fasten this together and just put thumbs against the clasp, fingers on the inside, and ease it, and that's it. One pretty butterfly bangle that looks very different depending on the beads you use. Please don't be afraid to experiment. Those are 6mm lapis, these are 5mm pearls, 2 of them in silver, 1 in copper, all giving very, very different butterflies. So whether you want to make one like mine and follow the tutorial exactly, or whether you want to sort of spread out and try with some different beads, I'm really looking forward to seeing what you've made. Thank you so much for watching. Happy wrapping!